Millionaire mocks poor family in restaurant. He lives to regret it. Everyone has heard stories about how the wealthy and powerful use their wealth to belittle people who do not fit into their social class. The terrible thing is that these acts of bullying are usually just done to show off their successes. Some good people still speak up for what's right, even though the majority of spectators would choose to remain silent in order to avoid being part of the mess. And this millionaire recently received the most unexpected teacher for his lesson. The family was dressed simply, and it looked like they were enjoying their own company in peace. Tony started off by making jokes about the family, and he made sure that his voice was loud enough so that the poor family could hear him. He started shouting things like, "What's a group of losers doing in a luxury restaurant like this?" and his friends would snicker loudly and agree with him. But to his dismay, the family continued with their meal and ignored him and his group. When the first course was served, Tony started tossing small pieces of food in the direction of the poor family. The people around him encouraged his behavior by laughing at what he was doing. One of the waitresses saw this and wondered aloud why he was acting like a child. The waitress came up to him and asked him to stop. It was the first time that anybody in the restaurant had reacted to his behavior, and the millionaire did not take it well. He couldn't believe this waitress would embarrass him in front of his guests. Tony said that the poor low-life family could not be important to him in the restaurant. He even wondered if the family could afford a single appetizer on the menu. During Tony's tantrums, the family stood up and started gathering their things. They weren't even able to finish their meals. It looked like the bully had won. They left some money on the table and prepared to leave. Tony noticed the family was about to leave and started to laugh. Now he had the restaurant to himself just the way he wanted. But before the poor family left, the father looked over his shoulder and his sad eyes met Tony's for a brief moment. It was the first time Tony had a good look at the father's face. The millionaire froze for a second as a feeling of recognition swept over him. He knew he had seen those eyes before, but he couldn't remember where. Sarah, the waitress from earlier, overheard Tony asking one of the staff if she had any idea who the family was. The other waitress had no clue, but Sarah knew this family very well. Sarah grabbed her notepad and quickly scribbled down a note. She ripped the page out and waited for her chance. Tony went to the bathroom and Sarah decided to march right up to him and hand him the note. Tony smiled at her slyly, thinking that it was her number, and got the note and smoothly placed it in his pocket. He even looked around to make sure nobody saw the exchange. Tony returned to his guests, who were already drunk and still having a great time. Tony tried his best to enjoy the evening, but his mind was preoccupied. One of Tony's friends asked him if he was okay. Tony then remembered the note the waitress passed him. He excused himself and went to the bathroom where he could read it privately. In the privacy of the bathroom, Tony pulled out the note and was stunned at what it read. "You made a big mistake insulting that family at the other table. The father will call you in the morning to let you know how much trouble you're in." Tony visits his favorite restaurant on a regular basis. Because he frequented the establishment and had a preferred table, everyone in the restaurant knew him. He left big tips and was frequently given preference for his orders. Every time he entered and someone was already seated at his table, the staff would ask the other party to switch places and frequently offer them free dessert as a way of making up for the inconvenience. Tony felt like a king in this restaurant as a result of this exceptional treatment. He felt as though he was the owner of the restaurant and can do whatever he pleased there. It was understandable why he occasionally acted like a rowdy barbarian who didn't care about the other diners. Some of the visitors would even grumble about his conduct, but the management assured him he was their finest client. Few people went to the eatery as a consequence. Tony was a frequent overspender at the restaurant, so the management was unconcerned about the loss. Not only other customers found Tony's actions repulsive, some of the staff members were also troubled by his behavior, but they were reluctant to voice their concerns out of concern that their manager would side with Tony. They could actually lose their jobs over it. Tony enjoyed bringing his buddies to this restaurant since it appeared like he had the upper hand there, and his buddies would constantly be impressed by how the restaurant staff would go above and beyond to satisfy his requests. Tony entered the restaurant one Monday night with a group of friends. He informed the staff that he had an occasion to celebrate and requested the restaurant's most special dishes. The gang appeared to have been drinking. At about 9 in the evening, the kitchen had already been shut. Yet when Tony entered, the staff was powerless to refuse him. Tony's enormous tab would make an extra labor for the cooks worthwhile, so they resumed their duties. There weren't many customers left in the restaurant at that point. Tony and his crew quickly sent the other patrons away with their raucous and nasty conduct. With the exception of one family, Tony nearly had the restaurant to himself. He observed that they'd even placed a few drink orders. Tony saw this as a test and began to consider how quickly he might intimidate the family out of the restaurant. He immediately rushed out of the bathroom and started looking for the waitress who'd given him the note. He had to know more about this family and why was the father an important man, but the waitress was long gone. Little did he know that Sarah had been keeping a close eye on him. When she saw Tony go to the bathroom, she clocked out immediately and left. She had no intention of giving Tony any additional information. With Sarah gone, Tony spent the rest of the evening absent-minded. The recent events had sobered him up and he couldn't stop thinking about those sad eyes. He even nearly forgot to settle the bill, but that wasn't the only thing he forgot. That night, Tony didn't leave a tip for the restaurant. It was very disappointing knowing how the staff tolerated his behavior for years because he was a generous tipper. Now, Tony had them working overtime with no tip? Unbelievable. Tony couldn't sleep. All he could think about was that father and his sad eyes. Why did he look so familiar? If he'd seen this man before, then he must be someone important. Could he have bullied someone of a higher ranking? When morning came, Tony kept checking his phone constantly. If the waitress was right, the father he bullied would be calling him today. The anticipation of the call just made him more nervous, but his phone stayed silent until late in the afternoon. Tony was sitting at his desk catching up on the latest news when his phone suddenly rang with an unknown number. Could this be the call he was warned about? Tony took a deep breath and picked up the phone. At the other end of the line was a husky male voice who had a serious tone when he greeted him. Tony got straight to the point and asked if he was the man from the restaurant. The man confirmed him. Tony asked how they knew each other and how the man had gotten his number. The man on the other end avoided the question and continued talking about how him and the rest of his family were deeply in shock that anyone could behave that way. Tony was becoming impatient and was getting fed up with the lecture. He interrupted the man and asked him a very specific question about the night before. There was silence on the other end. Tony then instinctively knew this wasn't the man he bullied. The truth is, the man on the other end of the line was Sarah's husband pretending to be the father of the bullied family. Sarah doesn't really know the family, they were just a random family that had a late dinner there. When Tony heard the silence over the phone, he connected the dots immediately and hung up. He was probably being pranked and was glad he figured it out right away. Now that he knows the truth, things could go back to normal again, or so he thought. That night, Tony went back to the restaurant, but to his surprise, they wouldn't let him in. The manager had heard what happened the night before and decided to ban the troublesome, rude millionaire from the restaurant. News of the ban spread and people started coming back to it. The family Tony bullied came back the next week and the manager welcomed them with a free meal. From now on, Tony just had to find another place for his rude, horrible shenanigans.